For 12,000 years, the Galactic Council had never encountered a species that simply said no and meant "T" until humanity arrived and proved that sometimes the most terrifying response to overwhelming power is absolute refusal to surrender. The crystalline halls of the Galactic Council trembled with an energy that had nothing to do with the massive fusion reactors powering the orbital station. Ambassador Zexhai of the Korthani hegemony stood before the assembled representatives, his 6 eyes reflecting the holographic display that showed the human fleet's current position. 300 vessels hung in the void just beyond the Proxima defense grid, their sleek forms bristling with weapons that made even the most hardened military advisors nervous. Esteemed colleagues, Zexhai's voice carried the weight of barely controlled panic. Though his species had evolved past such crude emotional displays millennia ago, the humans have rejected our 13th proposal for peaceful resolution. They refuse to acknowledge the Galactic Accords. They refuse to recognize our territorial claims, and most disturbing of all, they refuse to negotiate. A ripple of unease passed through the council chamber. The Velthok representative's tentacles writhed in what could only be described as existential dread. "This is unprecedented," she whispered through her translator unit. "In 12,000 years of galactic civilization, no species has ever simply refused to talk." High Chancellor Morden of the Epsilon Collective rose from his gravitational suspension field, his ancient form crackling with bioelectric discharge. "Perhaps they don't understand our communication protocols. Have we tried adjusting the frequency parameters?" "We've tried everything," Admiral Kessitar interjected, his battle-scarred carapace clicking with agitation. "Quantum entanglement messaging, psionic broadcasts, even primitive electromagnetic signals. They receive our transmissions perfectly. They understand every word. They just don't care." The silence that followed was deafening. For species that had built their entire civilization on diplomacy, trade agreements, and carefully negotiated treaties, the concept of absolute refusal was beyond comprehension. It was like trying to explain color to a blind organism or music to a deaf world. 3 days earlier, aboard the human dreadnought Indomitable, Captain Sarah Chen had finished reading the latest Galactic Council proposal with something approaching amusement. The alien coalition had offered territorial concessions, mining rights, technology transfers, and even cultural exchange programs. They clearly believed this was simply a matter of finding the right price. They were wrong. "Admiral Morrison," Chen addressed the grizzled veteran who commanded the human expeditionary force, "the Council has sent another offer. They're willing to grant us 3 systems in the Outer Rim and recognition as a developing sapient species, in exchange for our withdrawal from this sector." Morrison's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Developing species? We've been traveling between stars for over 2 centuries. We've colonized 47 worlds and established trade routes that span half the galaxy. And they want to treat us like children playing with toys too dangerous for our age." The bridge crew exchanged glances. They all knew the story. Humanity had emerged from their home system to find a galaxy already carved up between ancient powers. Every habitable world claimed, every resource allocated, every trade route controlled by species that had achieved spaceflight when humans were still discovering fire. The Galactic Council had graciously offered humanity the role of junior partners, servants, really, in a civilization they had no hand in building. Humanity had politely declined. "What should I tell them, sir?" Chen asked, though she already knew the answer. "The same thing we've told them every time," Morrison replied, his voice carrying the weight of an entire species' determination. "We're not interested in their terms. We're not interested in their offers. We're not interested in their version of galactic civilization. We'll make our own way." Back in the council chambers, the debate had devolved into something approaching chaos. The Xantheran delegate was literally glowing with stress, her photosynthetic skin cycling through colors that would have been beautiful if they weren't indicators of impending cardiovascular failure. "They're not following the protocols," she wailed. "How can we have order without protocols?" "Order?" The voice came from the shadows where the Nightkin ambassador lurked. His species rarely spoke, preferring to communicate through pheromone releases and subtle electromagnetic fields, but the human situation had driven even them to verbal expression. "What order? They've ignored our territorial boundaries, established colonies in unclaimed space that we were saving for future expansion, and built a military that makes our combined fleets nervous. Your order is already gone. Elder Thosamil of the Ancient Archive spoke with the authority of a being who had witnessed the rise and fall of 17 different galactic civilizations. In my experience, his voice creaked like old stellar matter. Species that refuse to negotiate fall into two categories: those too primitive to understand the concept, and those too powerful to need it. The chamber fell silent. Everyone present knew which category they feared the humans might belong to. Chancellor Morden's bioelectric aura flickered with uncertainty. But they're a young species. They've only been in space for 200 of their years? How can they be too powerful? Youth is not weakness, Admiral Kessitar observed grimly. My military analysts have been studying human tactics since their first contact with the Rigelian Mining Consortium. They don't fight like any species we know. They don't think like any species we know. When the Rigelians tried to enforce their protection fees on human shipping, the humans didn't file a complaint or request arbitration. They sent a single frigate that somehow managed to disable 3 Rigelian battlecruisers without firing a shot. Impossible, someone muttered. The human captain walked aboard the Rigelian flagship and had a conversation with their Admiral Kestar continued. 20 minutes later, the Rigelians withdrew their entire fleet and issued a public apology. To this day, no one knows what was said in that room, but the Rigelian admiral retired immediately afterward and has refused all interview requests. The truth, had the council known it, was both simpler and more terrifying than their wildest theories. Humanity had indeed developed something unique in their short time among the stars, not superior technology or psychic powers, but a philosophy that made them incompatible with the existing galactic order. In the human colony of New Geneva, Dr. Elena Vasquez was delivering a lecture to the Colonial Defense Academy that perfectly encapsulated this philosophy. The galaxy is vast, she told her students, but it's not infinite. The council species have divided it up like a pie, with each slice carefully measured and allocated according to treaties signed before our sun finished forming. They offer us crumbs and expect gratitude. She gestured to a holographic map showing human settlements scattered across dozens of systems. But space isn't like planetary real estate. You can't fence it, you can't truly own it, and you can't prevent others from using it unless you're willing to enforce that prevention through constant vigilance and overwhelming force. The council maintains their order through mutual agreement and shared interest. It works because everyone involved benefits from the stability. A young cadet raised her hand. But don't we benefit from stability too, Professor? That depends on what kind of stability we're talking about, Vasquez replied. Stability for whom? The council offers us stability as junior partners in their system. We'll have our designated space, our assigned role, our carefully regulated interactions with other species. We'll be safe, secure, and forever limited to whatever growth they permit us. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Humanity has chosen a different path. We've decided that freedom is worth more than security, that growth is worth more than stability, and that our potential is worth more than their permission. The crisis reached its peak when the Galactic Council made a decision that would haunt them for generations to come. Faced with humanity's continued refusal to negotiate, they voted to implement economic sanctions and, if necessary, military intervention to bring the upstart species into compliance with galactic law. The vote was close. 7 species in favor, 5 opposed with 3 abstentions, but it was enough. Within hours, council fleets began moving toward human space, their commanders carrying sealed orders and profound misgivings about what they might face. Ambassador Zexhai personally delivered the ultimatum to the human embassy on Kepler Station. The human ambassador, a middle-aged woman named Rebecca Torres, received the message with the same calm politeness that had characterized every human diplomatic interaction. Ms. Torres, Zexhai began, his translator struggling with the emotional undertones in his voice. The Galactic Council has authorized me to deliver this final offer. Comply with Council territorial claims and submit to peaceful integration into galactic civilization, or face the combined might of 14 species united in purpose. Torres read the ultimatum carefully, her expression never changing. When she finished, she set the datapad aside and looked directly at Zexhai with eyes that held no fear, no anger, no desperation, only a terrible certainty that made the alien ambassador's skin crawl. Ambassador Zexhai, she said quietly, Please return to your council and give them this message. Humanity appreciates their concern for galactic stability, but we must respectfully decline their offer. We will continue to pursue our own path among the stars, with or without their approval. Zexai's primary eyes widened in disbelief. You cannot be serious. Do you understand what you're facing? 14 species, thousands of ships, weapons that could sterilize entire star systems. Torres smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Zexai had ever seen. Ambassador, humanity has faced extinction dozens of times in our brief history. We've survived ice ages, plagues, wars that consumed entire continents, and environmental catastrophes that should have ended our species. We've been conquered, enslaved, oppressed, and written off as extinct more times than your oldest civilizations have changed governments. She stood up, her small human frame somehow seeming to fill the entire room. And yet here we are, walking between the stars and refusing to bow to powers that consider themselves our betters. Your council has made the same mistake that every would-be conqueror in human history has made. You've assumed that because we're young, we're weak. Because we're small, we're helpless. Because we refuse your terms, we're unreasonable. What are you saying? Zexai whispered. I'm saying that humanity didn't spread across 47 star systems by being reasonable. We didn't build a fleet that makes your admirals nervous by playing by other people's rules. And we didn't come this far just to stop because someone bigger than us said we couldn't go any further. Torres reached into her desk and pulled out a simple data crystal, holding it up to the light. This contains the complete military and industrial capacity of humanity as of this morning. Ship counts, weapon specifications, manufacturing capabilities, resource allocation, strategic plans. Everything your council would need to make an informed decision about the wisdom of forcing a conflict with us. Zexai stared at the crystal as if it were a venomous creature. Why are you showing me this? Because, Torres said, placing the crystal back in her drawer without offering it to him. We want your council to understand that our refusal to negotiate isn't based on ignorance or stubbornness. It's based on a careful calculation of what we're willing to sacrifice for the right to determine our own future. She walked to the window overlooking the docking bays where sleek human ships moved alongside alien vessels, in what had been until now peaceful coexistence. Your species achieved interstellar flight through cooperation and gradual technological development. You built your civilizations on consensus and mutual benefit. It's a beautiful system, and it's given you 12,000 years of relative peace and prosperity. But, Zexai prompted, sensing there was more. But it requires everyone to accept their assigned place in the order. It requires smaller species to defer to larger ones, newer civilizations to accept the wisdom of older ones, and everyone to prioritize stability over growth. Torres turned back to face him. Humanity can't accept that. It's not in our nature. We're a species that looked at an ocean and decided to cross it, looked at the sky and decided to fly through it, looked at space and decided to live in it. We don't accept limitations imposed by others, even when those others are older, wiser, and more powerful than we are. The alien ambassador felt something like understanding beginning to dawn, followed immediately by a terror so profound that his translator unit actually shut down for several seconds from the biochemical overload. You're going to fight, he whispered when he could speak again. All of us. You're actually going to fight the entire Galactic Council. Torres nodded slowly. If we have to. We'd prefer not to. War is wasteful and tragic, and we genuinely respect many of the Council species. But if the choice is between submission and survival, humanity has already made its decision. The emergency session of the Galactic Council that followed Ambassador Torres' statement was unlike anything in the organization's long history. Representatives who had served together for centuries found themselves questioning assumptions that had seemed unshakable just days before. Elder Thosmil spoke first, his ancient voice carrying the weight of eons. I have consulted the archive records dating back to the first convergence. In all that time, no species has ever chosen conflict with the entire council. Even the most aggressive civilizations eventually accepted negotiated settlements rather than face extinction. The humans are different, Admiral Kessitar stated flatly. My intelligence analysis suggests they're not bluffing. Their industrial capacity has been underestimated by a factor of at least 3, possibly 5. Their ship designs incorporate technologies we've never seen before, and their tactical doctrines are completely outside our understanding. High Chancellor Morden's bioelectric field flickered with agitation. But there's still just one species against 14. The mathematics are impossible, are they? The question came from an unexpected source. Ambassador Veltar of the Hegemony, whose species had historically been among the most aggressive members of the Council. We've been assuming that this is about mathematics, ship counts and weapon yields and industrial output. But what if we're approaching this wrong? The chamber stirred uneasily. Veltar was known for his strategic insight, and his willingness to speak up suggested he'd identified something the others had missed. Consider this scenario, Veltar continued. We assemble our combined fleets and move against human space. We have superior numbers, superior technology in many areas, and the advantage of a coordinated assault. We will almost certainly win any direct military confrontation. Then what's the problem? Someone called out. The problem, Veltar said grimly, is what happens after we win. We'll have a devastated human civilization spread across 47 star systems, with surviving populations that have just watched their species fight the entire galaxy rather than surrender their freedom. Do we occupy those worlds? Do we station fleets in every human system to prevent rebellion? Do we try to govern a species that chose war over diplomacy? The implications began to sink in around the chamber. The Council's entire structure was built on voluntary cooperation. They had no experience with governing unwilling subjects, no infrastructure for long-term occupation, no cultural understanding of how to manage a species that simply refused to accept defeat. There's another possibility, Elder Thosmil added quietly. What if we don't win? The suggestion was so absurd that several representatives actually laughed. But the laughter died quickly as they saw the serious expression on the ancient being's face. The humans have been preparing for this confrontation since their first contact with galactic civilization, he continued. They've had time to study our tactics, our technologies, our strategic limitations. They've positioned their colonies and fleets with this conflict in mind. Most importantly, they've chosen this fight. They're not being forced into it. They're walking into it with their eyes open and their plans already made. Unknown to the Galactic Council, their debate was being monitored from the bridge of the human command ship Defiance, where Admiral Morrison and his senior staff were watching the proceedings with grim satisfaction. They're starting to understand, observed Captain Chen, her eyes fixed on the intelligence feed from their sources within the Council station. The smart ones are beginning to realize that this isn't a conventional territorial dispute. Morrison nodded, his weathered face showing no emotion. The question is whether the smart ones have enough influence to change the Council's course. Bureaucracies this large develop their own momentum. Sometimes they can't stop even when they want to. And if they can't stop? Asked Commander Rodriguez, Morrison's tactical officer. Then we implement Plan Omega, Morrison replied simply. The bridge fell silent. Everyone present knew what Plan Omega entailed, though the details were classified at levels that made most military secrets look like public announcements. It was humanity's final gambit, the strategy they would employ if peaceful coexistence proved impossible. Sir, Chen said carefully, are we certain we're prepared for the consequences? Plan Omega isn't something we can take back once it's in motion. Morrison turned to look at her, and she saw in his eyes the same terrible certainty that Ambassador Torres had shown to Zexhai. Captain, humanity spent 2 centuries preparing for this moment. We knew from our first contact with the galaxy that this day would come. The Council species built their civilization on the assumption that everyone would eventually accept their place in the established order. We built ours on the assumption that we would never accept any place we didn't choose for ourselves. He gestured toward the tactical display showing Council fleets massing at strategic points throughout the galaxy. They see this as a police action, a necessary intervention to maintain stability and order. We see it as the moment we prove that freedom is worth any price, including the price of standing alone against the entire galaxy. And if we lose? Rodriguez asked quietly. Morrison's smile was sharp as a blade. Commander, humanity has never fought a war with the intention of losing. We've lost battles, campaigns, entire theaters of conflict, but we've never entered a fight planning to surrender. If we lose here, it won't be because we didn't give everything we had. The final council vote was closer than anyone had expected. 8 species in favor of military action, 6 opposed or abstaining. The slim majority was enough to authorize the deployment of combined fleets, but the narrow margin meant that half the galaxy's major powers had serious reservations about the wisdom of forcing a confrontation with humanity. As Council warships began their approach to human space, a strange thing happened across the galaxy. Species that had remained neutral began quietly withdrawing their commercial vessels from areas where human ships operated. Trade routes that had functioned for centuries were suddenly abandoned. Diplomatic missions were recalled, cultural exchanges canceled, and scientific collaborations terminated. It was as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen when an irresistible force met an object that simply refused to move. On the human colony world of New Frontier, families gathered around public communication screens to watch the news feeds. Children who had never known a time when humans weren't exploring. The stars listened as their parents explained why ships were disappearing from the sky and why their older siblings were putting on military uniforms. "Are we going to be okay?" asked a young girl whose mother was boarding a transport to join the Colonial Defense Force. Her mother knelt down and took her daughter's hands in her own. "Sweetheart, we're going to do what humans have always done when someone tries to tell us we can't do something. We're going to prove them wrong." "But they're bigger than us," the girl protested. "There are more of them." "Yes, there are," her mother agreed. "But being bigger doesn't make you right, and having more ships doesn't make you braver. Your great-great-grandmother once told me something that her great-great-grandmother told her, back when humans lived on just one world and dreamed of touching the stars." "What did she say?" Her mother stood up, shouldering her pack with the same casual determination that had carried humans from caves to starships in just a few thousand years. "She said that the only way to guarantee you'll never accomplish something impossible is to decide in advance that it can't be done." As transport after transport lifted off from New Frontier and dozens of other human worlds, carrying civilians who had volunteered to serve in whatever capacity their skills allowed, the galaxy watched in fascination and growing unease. These weren't professional soldiers marching off to war. They were farmers and teachers, engineers and artists, shopkeepers and students. They were ordinary people who had decided that their freedom was worth fighting for, even against impossible odds. The first engagement between Council forces and human ships occurred at the edge of the Kepler system, where a human patrol squadron encountered the advance elements of a combined Zentharan-Corthani task force. According to standard galactic protocol, there should have been a final exchange of diplomatic messages, one last opportunity for negotiation before hostilities began. Instead, the human squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Martinez, transmitted a message that would be studied by military historians for generations to come. "Council vessels, this is the human ship Persistence. You have entered space claimed by humanity and defended by humans who chose to be here. You have approximately 30 seconds to reverse course before we demonstrate why that choice was a mistake. This is your only warning." The Council commanders, operating under strict rules of engagement that required multiple warnings and graduated responses, were still formulating their reply when the human ships opened fire. The battle lasted 17 minutes. When it ended, 3 Council cruisers had been disabled, 2 destroyers had surrendered, and the remaining ships were retreating at maximum velocity. The human squadron had suffered moderate damage to 2 vessels and no casualties. More importantly, the engagement had been broadcast across every major communication network in the galaxy. Billions of beings watched in stunned silence as a handful of human ships outmaneuvered and outfought a force that should have been able to destroy them with minimal effort. In the Council chambers, the emergency session that followed was a chaos of accusations, demands for explanations, and growing panic. Admiral Kessitar's tactical analysis was brutally simple. The humans weren't lucky. They weren't fighting desperately. They were implementing a coordinated battle plan with precision and effectiveness that suggests extensive preparation and superior tactical doctrine. "How is that possible?" Chancellor Mordun demanded. "They've only been in space for 2 centuries. "Because," Elder Thossamil said quietly, "they've spent those 2 centuries preparing for exactly this scenario. While we were maintaining the peace, they were studying war." 6 months later, the Galactic Council found itself facing a reality that none of its member species had anticipated. Humanity had not only survived the initial military confrontation, but had successfully defended every one of their claimed territories. More disturbing still, human ships were now operating freely throughout the galaxy, establishing new colonies and trade routes without regard for Council territorial claims. Ambassador Zexhai stood once again in the Council chambers, But this time he was not delivering ultimatums or demands for compliance. He was reading a message from the human government that would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy. The human colonial government extends greetings to the Galactic Council, he began, his voice carrying none of the authority it had held months before. We wish to inform the Council that humanity remains open to establishing diplomatic and commercial relations with any species willing to recognize our sovereignty and respect our territorial claims. He paused, the next part of the message clearly causing him physical discomfort. However, we wish to make it clear that such relations will be conducted as agreements between equals, not as negotiations between superior and subordinate parties. Humanity does not seek membership in the Galactic Council under the current charter, as we do not recognize the Council's authority to regulate human expansion or activities in unclaimed space. The chamber erupted in angry voices, but Zexhai continued reading. Finally, we wish to extend an invitation to any species or individuals who share humanity's vision of unrestricted growth and exploration. The galaxy is vast enough for all of us, provided we can agree to treat each other with the respect that sapient beings deserve. When the shouting died down, Elder Thosamil asked the question that everyone was thinking. What happens now? The answer came not from the council chambers but from the void between the stars, where human ships continued their patient expansion into territories that no one had claimed, and everyone had assumed would remain empty forever. Humanity had refused to negotiate not because they were unreasonable, but because they had seen a future that the Council could not imagine, a galaxy where the only limitations on growth were the boundaries of space itself. They had gambled everything on the belief that freedom was worth any price. The galaxy was still discovering whether they had been right. This story explores the classic HFY theme of human exceptionalism through our species' refusal to accept limitations imposed by others, even when those others appear more powerful. The narrative examines how different approaches to conflict resolution and expansion can lead to fundamental incompatibilities between civilizations, and how the willingness to risk everything for freedom can shift the balance of power in unexpected ways.